Hello, everybody. Welcome to this week's episode of the County Seat. I'm your host, Chad Booth. In the last 6 years, the County Seat has covered the wild horse issue 4 times. We are about to cover it again. It is important because the situation on the ground, no pun intended, has changed significantly. The numbers of horses continue to grow despite efforts to capture, manage, adopt, place, or otherwise eliminate horses from the range. None of them have been successful because, in the eyes of many observers, the BLM's hands are tied. We are going to once again look at some of the solution with a very distinguished panel who has on-the-ground experience and expertise on the subject. But we are going to start by bringing you a short history of the wild horse in Utah. Here's Cameron Porter.
What's the image that comes to mind when you hear wild horses? Is it the iconic image of beautiful Mustangs galloping through long, tall grass on a hilly plain? Unfortunately, this iconic imagery of wild American Mustangs is no longer true to life. Why? Let's find out.
So the appropriate management level for the rangeland in the 10 western states is about 27,000. We're currently sitting at 61,000 on the range in those 10 states. So our numbers are over what they should be.
Well, starting in the mid-'80s, late 80s, I guess you would say, we actually started putting horses in what we call off-range pastures. And that's because we started getting an excess amount of horses that were removed that we couldn't find homes for, and so we ended up putting horses into pastures. Well, that's increased over the time where we literally have over 45,000 animals now in off-range pastures that we can't find a home for.
The BLM often conducts gather operations like what was done recently in the Blonde Wash area, an hour and a half south and west of Milford, Utah. They gather excess wild horses from a specific area and get them ready for adoption. This time, their goal was 150 horses.
We are gathering excess wild horses we're actually outside of the Blonde Wash herd area. But we've been here all week gathering within or close to the Blonde Wash herd area. We've got an objective of getting 150. That's what we've actually agreed to, both with our internally and with our agreement that we have with the school institutional trust lands.
Today is our 7th day in gather operations for this Blonde Wash gather. So far, we've gathered 127 horses.
The overpopulation of wild horses is causing quite a problem in many areas that are used for cattle grazing. For lands that the BLM manages, it can be difficult to find the right solution to deal with the overpopulation.
If we were to manage for non-reproducing herds, such as a gelding herd, what are the impacts to that herd? Would it be, what kind of social impacts do you see? What kind of impacts to the range? You know, we want to do what's best not only for the horses, but also for the range, because we have been taxed to manage for an ecological balance and for multi-purpose use.
And so we have the adoption as a tool, and then we have more or less pasturing horses in off-range pastures is our only 2 options. So because of that, BLM has really started looking far and wide at what else can we do? You know, what else can we do to reduce the population growth that's out there? And that's where we've been really focusing in on different forms of population growth suppression, everything from fertility control to spaying and neutering, which is just, you know, something that we wouldn't even have been talking about 4 or 5 years ago.
In this episode of the County Seat, we want to talk about the history of this issue, what the current status is, and possible solutions to the overpopulation of wild horses. We'll cover these issues when we join our guest panel. For the County Seat, I'm Cameron Porter.
Cameron, thank you for that report. We will move on to the conversation when we continue our discussion on wild horses. Call your friends, let them know that this conversation is about to take place. It will be very interesting. We'll see you on the flip side after a commercial break here on the County Seat.
When the road takes you farther than you knew possible, when the world is more beautiful than you've ever seen, when home is more comfortable than it should be, this is when you know you're in Kane County. The perfect mix of rural and urban, culture and adventure. Glendale, Orderville, Kanab, Bigwater, small towns with more to offer than just peace and quiet. Kane County, Utah. Find the new you.
There's a little place on a Utah map where I was raised, where my heart's at, where the sagebrush grows wild and high, and the stars come out at night. Oh, there ain't nothing like being raised in the basin with a Ute reservation, skiing starvation, that Duchesne County life.
Beautiful scene, isn't it? The great wide spaces of the wild, wild West. Hi, I'm Chad Booth, host of At Your Leisure. I'm asking you to support the Blue Ribbon Coalition. Their efforts responsibly preserve access to our public lands. If it were not for the Blue Ribbon Coalition and their efforts, you may not have access to millions of acres of land across the West. This is America's playground, and if we don't do anything, we are going to lose it. Join, participate, and donate.
Have you ever wanted to recreate the world around you? Add some excitement, culture, adventure? Well, there's no need to remake the world when that perfect combination already exists. Just remember 4 words. Welcome to Weber County. In Ogden, you'll find everything you're looking for, from the top of Powder Mountain to the restaurants of our revitalized downtown. Ogden, Utah, mountain to metro and everything in between. Visit ogden.com.
Welcome back to the county seat. We are talking today about the wild horse issue. It's been a couple of years since we've done an update on this, and there's been a lot of motion in the field, I guess is an interesting way to say it. The herd's moved around the pasture a lot since we started last, or talked last. Joining us for our conversation, Callie Hendrickson, who is the Executive Director of the White River and Douglas Creek Conservation District, just over the border in Colorado. Thank you for making the trip into Salt Lake.
You bet.
Keith Norris, who is the chair of the National Horse and Bureau Rangeland Management Coalition. That's a mouthful. And I only said half of what your title is, right?
Yes.
And also joining us, as always, Tammy Pearson, Commissioner from Beaver County, who's always a welcome guest on our show. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much.
So the last time we actually did a show on the wild horse issue, Beaver County and Iron County, Utah had just thrown down the gauntlet and informed the BLM that if they didn't gather, the counties were going to. And that was the last show we brought. I think it would probably be wise for us to do a little update. What's happened since then?
We have lucked out and got a few gathers. We've actually gathered, they just finished a gather this summer on the Frisco allotment. Going to get, I think they got 113 there. They've also gathered on the Blonde Wash, 158 there this summer. They're not done yet. They're going to have to finish this winter. And they've gathered a few out on Mountain Home, kind of emergency gathers. That, you know, they were outside of the HMA on the highways and were causing safety issues. So they did some emergency gathers there.
And Chad, what's happened, despite those gathers and limited numbers that have been gathered here in Utah, is populations have really continued to grow. So right now in Utah, there are, the BLM estimates, the Bureau of Land Management estimates that there are just under 6,000 horses and burros in the state, despite an appropriate management level management objective of a little under 2,000. So we see about 300% above AML. That compares to national numbers nationwide, where the BLM has approximately 67,000 horses and burros. So over the past few years since your last show on this topic, populations have really continued to grow at a rate of about 15 to 20% every single year, despite the fact that the BLM continues to do these very small gathers and really doing very limited efforts in trying to address that on-range management approach.
So, Callie, a question for you. You know, you've got some rangeland to take care of in Colorado that you're responsible for. And so when Beaver County and Iron County come in and file a lawsuit and they get bumped up in the line for gathers, and we have 60,000 horses in holding pens across the nation, they're already full, and they don't really have a place to put them. How does that make your district feel?
You know, that's a very real issue, real concern. In Colorado, we don't have even as many horses as you do have, but again, just across the state line, we were fortunate and got 167 gathered out of the West Douglas herd area, which there are to be 0. Now there are still 170 head of horses still there, even after they got 167 out. The one that really suffers from all of that, in my opinion, is Nevada. and Wyoming are the ones with the big numbers. But yeah, we are, and BLM is doing, trying to gather those little numbers where they absolutely have to through court cases and emergency gathers. It's that situation where there's thousands of horses within one HMA that is really a problem for rangeland health.
And Chad, that's to your point of kind of prioritizing gathers. The BLM is not able to gather horses. So in addition to those 67,000 horses that are currently nationwide on BLM rangelands, there are 45,000 or so in the holding facilities. And the BLM's budget is stretched to the point where it cannot afford to attain more holding facilities for those horses. And so they're having to prioritize their gathers to where it's court ordered, to where there's human safety concerns, or to where there are emergency situations for the health of the herds. And so they are not gathering where those rangeland conditions need to be protected.
You're watching an issue on the wild horse situation on the county seat. We'll be back in just a second.
149 million years in the making, dinosaurs once roamed this land. Now they're found at the Dinosaur National Monument. Let's take you beyond the bones. We call it Dinosaur Land. You'll find it offers adventures and sights not seen anywhere else in the world. Come to Dinosaur Land, Vernal, Utah. You'll want to stay forever. The dinosaurs did.
What would you do with an extra day in Utah Valley? Explore the Wasatch Mountains? Snap a family photo at Bridal Veil Falls. Cool off on Utah Lake or the Provo River. No matter what you're searching for, you can find it in Utah Valley. Bring everyone together.
Unlimited opportunity for adventure. It's all about knowing where to look. ATV adventures, rock crawling events, art festivals, and wildlife events. The opportunities are limitless. Pick your adventure in Millard County.
ATV? Check. Four-wheel driving? Check. Bouldering? Check. Mountain biking? Check. Hiking? Check. River rafting? Check. Adventure is about more than just crossing activities off of a list, but hey, if you can find a place that gives you everything you're looking for, all the better. In Emery County, you'll find the San Rafael swell, trails, lakes, and the small-town hospitality you're looking for. San Rafael Country, in the heart of Utah. Visit us and check something off your list.
Welcome back to the county seat. We are talking today about wild horses and an update on the situation. I think I made a misstatement at the tail end of the last segment in that I confused holding or contract pastures, basically, where the BLM's paying people to take care of horses versus what's the rangeland. Callie, could you kind of clarify those numbers for me?
Sure. Our current statistics are that out on the BLM land where they can manage horses, that land will support about 27,000 head of horses. Right now, there's about 67,000 out there. So that's the current situation on the range. Then we've got, in addition to that, another 48,000 head of horses that are in holding facilities, so either short-term or long-term, so your pasture situation and the feedlot situation. That's another roughly 48,000 head of horses that are there. So when you've got, those are your numbers, and the bottom line is for taking care of those horses that are already in the holding facilities, we're looking at about 53 million a year to feed those horses. So that's our current situation every year. So BLM has identified and recognized that if there were no more horses went into that holding facility today, from this point forward, just to feed and care for those horses, the rest of their life, those horses are already in there, $1 billion with a B. That's when we start getting concerned, is when we start talking in billions.
Wow.
And so not only is the financial aspect troubling as far as this management issue is concerned, but because of that financial burden that those off-range horses put on the BLM, they're not able to take care of the populations as they continue to grow at 15 to 20% every single year. And so because of that, we see impacts to the rangeland ecosystem, we see impacts to the native wildlife. These horses will overgraze areas, use the scarce water resources that are out there on the rangelands, and really take that away from the native wildlife, from the livestock grazing. And it's really a matter of undermining the multiple use concepts that our Bureau of Land Management and U.S. Forest Service rangelands have as a legal mandate when they were established.
Well, what was said on this range tour that Tammy arranged for the governor to see out in Beaver County last week, there was a rancher he said there's a triangle of support out here. You've got wildlife, you've got cattle, and you've got the horses. And it's saying that they have not been able to control the wildlife sufficiently. They certainly haven't controlled the horses correctly, and so the only person that they keep coming back to ask to make adjustments is the rancher who's grazing on that land, and they're being asked to handle an unjust burden. And I will get somebody every time. There will be one that comes in an email after this show. I can guarantee it will say, got to get the cattle off the range. They have no business being there. Let the horses have it all. If the greedy ranchers weren't out there, everything would be good. And I think they would also add the adjective welfare, which is a whole different issue and could get my ire up on that. So what's your answer to that when they make that claim?
You know, and I understand that. And people who don't want to see cattle on the range, okay, I understand that. The problem is, if we were to remove all of the livestock from the herd management areas, what that leaves us with is double the number of horses in 4 years. That does nothing to address the real issue. And the difference between the livestock and the horses grazing is the livestock is managed. Everything that goes on the range is managed, proactively managed, other than the wild horses. So livestock, you can only keep them a specific number there for a specific period of time at a specific time of the year, and that rotates, so it gives the grass the ability to come back. We have to be sure that we're leaving roughly 50% of the range there for wildlife and for the health of the range itself. And then the problem with the horse situation is, with the lack of management, and the law requires that you can't rotate them around like we do the cattle. So those horses sit there and graze on the same land, same grass, 365 days a year. And that's when you do serious damage to the range, is when you don't give it a rest so that the roots can regenerate that energy and reproduce the next time. So that's when we get into trouble with the range management.
So is part of the problem the fact that people fail to realize that the horses are not a native species, and so there's a predator problem? Because most other wildlife would somehow or another eventually be controlled by a predator base, would it not?
Yes, that's exactly true. Also, the difference between the horse and the livestock issue. Livestock are contributing not only to families, but also the counties on an economic basis. And our problem is, we've sat down and figured the numbers in Beaver County, and the AUM usage that the BLM is, that the horses are doing, directly cuts away from the economic value that the cattle and the sheep are providing. Plus, the cattle and the sheep, we're feeding people worldwide. It's a protein source, and that's something that, we need to reevaluate on the horse issue.
The question that I see pop in everybody's eyes that nobody's talking about is, well, gee, aren't horses a protein value as well?
Everywhere other than the United States. And even the United States imports horse meat, boxed horse meat, and they're feeding the animals at the zoos. They're doing all of these different things with horse meat that nobody realizes it's actually happening.
And I think, Chad, that's certainly one of the options that needs to be on the table for the BLM to consider is how they can deal with this excessive number of horses. So as I mentioned, they can't remove more horses because they don't have the budget resources to pay for more horses in holding facilities to care for those horses and feed them and house them. And so they're stuck between a rock and a hard place there. And so And the reason they can't sell horses is because of some restrictions Congress has placed on them that restrict their ability to euthanize or to sell without limitations horses. And so really the only method that the BLM currently has to remove horses from their care is through adoptions. And we've seen adoption demand for wild horses decline precipitously over the last decade or so. And so that's really not going to be an answer. And so we need to find either ways to get the BLM more resources so they can care for more horses and continue to care for more and more horses in holding facilities. That'll cost
at a rate of multiples of billions of dollars.
Multiples of billions of dollar commitment. Or we need to find more ways and alternative ways for them to offload horses that are already in their care.
If they were auctioning them off without restriction in livestock sales, wouldn't that actually generate some revenue?
It would, and the Wild Horse and Burro Act itself, as it has been amended, does state that, well, the steps it goes through is that BLM is to determine the number of horses that the range will support. Then when there are excess horses, they are to remove the excess horses, offer them for adoptions 3 times. Those that are not adopted within 3 times or are over 10 years old are to be sold without restrictions. And it even says at the local sale barn. It doesn't require that, but it does mention at the local sale barn. So that's what the Wild Horse and Burro Act states. And then you've got appropriations language that prohibits them from being able to sell horses without restrictions. So you've got 2 conflicting laws. That's what we talk about, is they're between a rock and a hard spot.
And also that's compounded by the fact that through federal action, we're not even able to process horse meat in the United States. Is that correct?
That is correct. So through similar congressional action, Congress has restricted the USDA from inspecting horse slaughter facilities for domestic horses. And so as a result, those slaughter facilities no longer exist in the United States.
You know, you said, Keith, earlier we needed 18 minutes for the segment. I realize we did because we're out of time. We'll be back with our final thoughts here on the county seat in just a minute.
There is a place where looking out means looking in, where an impression lasting only a few seconds will be imprinted on a life forever, where courage is forged and innocence rediscovered, where remembering is rewarding and forgetting unforgettable. There is a place where truth is felt and where seeing is believing. There is a place.
In a place that is beyond words, there is nothing to be said, except take your time in Bryce Canyon country.
What do you picture when you hear Rich County, Utah? Bear Lake adventure, snowmobile action, pristine skiing, spectacular solitude. Well, if that isn't what first came to mind, then you just don't know Rich County. The Bear Lake Monster Polar Plunge, snowmobiling Monte Cristo, ice fishing Bear Lake, skiing the backcountry, fishing at the Cisco Disco. Come and find out what you never knew you were missing. Rich County, Utah. The weekends just never feel like they're long enough. By the time you get to a destination, you're worn out and you may need a vacation to recover from your last vacation. The solution is closer than you think, and that's just what you need. You can find the desert at Little Sahara, the cool refreshment of Yuba Lake, escape to the green of the forest on the Nebo Loop. Make your escape to Juab County. It'll change your family forever.
Welcome back to the county seat. We've been talking about wild horses today. Makes my head swim every time we do this because the problem seems so obvious, the solution seems so out there, and you just can't get anybody to talk about them. So we're going to take the last 3 minutes. Tammy, of all the things that need to be done, what's the number? What has to happen?
The changes are going to have to be made in Congress. We've got to educate Congress that the horses are a huge problem that have to be dealt with, and it's not an easy solution. We have to be able to think outside the box, but ultimately they're going to have to change the laws so that we can either slaughter them or they have to appropriate more money.
This is the funny thing, though. If you were to step back in time 50 years, when we still had an agriculture mindset of the company, nobody would even think that slaughter of the excess horses is out of the box. It's just that it's now out of the box today. So something has shifted somewhere. There's some kind of disconnect. But your thoughts?
So I think, much like Tammy, I think Congress is going to be involved, and I think Congress is increasing their engagement and their interest in this issue. Some of your own congressmen from the state of Utah have been introducing some legislation. Congressman Stewart has introduced some legislation that would seek some new solutions to this that would allow states management. And so that's one possible avenue. I think it's going to require a multitude of tools that one way or another is going to need congressional action and likely more resources. We're going to need to find ways for the BLM to offload horses out of their care, whether that is through adoptions, through some sort of incentive, or through unrestricted sale. And I don't think unrestricted sale necessarily has to mean slaughter, but that means it doesn't restrict slaughter. And so anyone is able to buy those horses. And so it's not necessarily a we must slaughter horses. It's just we need to not worry about it.
We need to not care. It's
right.
Not our problem.
Exactly.
Anymore.
It's not our problem at that point. And so once we deal with that, then we need to devote more resources to the on-range management and ensure that we're gathering horses at numbers substantial enough that we maintain their populations at ecologically sustainable levels. And so that'll require gathers, that'll require fertility control applications, sterilization techniques, et cetera. And so it's a multitude of tools that are going to be needed, but Congress will have to be involved one way or the other.
Callie, your thoughts?
Well, and I totally agree with both of these guys, but the multiple tools are going to have to be available. So everything that the law, the Wild Horse and Burro Act requires, which is the ability to adopt, the ability to sell without restriction, and fertility control. We haven't mentioned a whole lot about the fertility control. While that is the buzzword that we hear today, and that's all we're hearing about, and we're headed to the BLM's Wild Horse and Burro Advisory Board meeting tomorrow in Elko, Nevada, and that's what we will hear about, is all about fertility control. It's great, but we cannot fertility control our way out of this until we get our numbers down to AML, and then we have to implement fertility control and keep the numbers there.
So there are drastic days ahead.
There is.
Listen, folks, thank you for watching The County Seat. Remember, local government is where your life happens. Be engaged, be part of the solution, get involved, share this with your friends. This is a really important issue. We'll see you next week on The County Seat. If you'd like to share this video with your friends, well, you do that right here. If you would like to subscribe to our YouTube channel, you do that over here. If you'd like to interact with us on The County Seat, that happens over here. If you want to watch the next episode of The County Seat, you can catch it Saturday night at 11 or Sunday morning at 8:30 on ABC4 Good for Utah.